The owner of Showtime movie theaters would like to predict weekly gross revenue, Y, as a function of advertising expenditures, television advertising X1 and newspaper advertising X2. And here we can see historical data for a sample of 8 weeks, and all the variables are measured in thousands of dollars. First of all, I'm going to take a quick graphical look at the data, and one reason for doing this is to see if there's any data points that look a little suspicious. Perhaps they represent errors, but there's nothing alarming about this matrix plot, so I'm going to proceed with the analysis. First of all, I'm going to develop an estimated regression equation with the amount of television advertising X1 as the independent variable. So here's my equation, and we're going to think about what that 1.604 in front of X1, what that number represents. And so we expect revenue, Y, to increase by $1,604 when TV advertising, X1, increases by $1,000. Remember, everything is measured in thousands of dollars. So that's our interpretation of the 1.604 that comes in front of X1. Next, I'm going to develop an estimated regression equation with both television advertising and newspaper advertising as the independent variables. So here's my equation, and we can see that we have a different number in front of X1. This time it's 2.290. And so to interpret that number, we have to remember that we have two variables in our equation now, X1 television advertising and X2 newspaper advertising. And so when we interpret that 2.290, we have to mention all the variables that are in the model, and this is how we do it. So we expect revenue, Y, to increase by $2,290 when TV advertising, X1, increases by $1,000, holding newspaper advertising, X2, constant. So it's a slightly more complicated interpretation, but it's very important that you have that phrase at the end of the sentence, holding newspaper advertising constant. And finally, predict weekly gross revenue for a week when $3,500 is spent on television advertising and $1,800 is spent on newspaper advertising. So we just have to plug in 3.5 for X1 and 1.8 for X2, and we obtain Y hat equals 93.6, which in the units that we're considering represents $93,600.